What's up, everyone? We're back.
Dr. Maxfield.
Dr. Shaw, and welcome back to our channel, Dr. Lee, where we talk about all things skincare and dermatology. Controversy.
I think we're feeling like edgy or something. I don't know what it is. We're going to do controversial skincare topics.
Yeah, sometimes there are days where I'm like, I just want to avoid any controversy. And then days where like a lot of misinformation gets out there and I'm like, all right, that's it. I'm going scorched earth.
I know, right? It's so frustrating sometimes watching these things. I'm like, oh man, I really want to say something to this. And then I'm like, I just don't have the energy or the time to mount a response and then kind of talk about things on the back end.
And a lot of times we don't have the information to answer some of these. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. So when something new and controversial comes out in skincare world or there's some news article about it, a lot of times we don't have enough details on the actual issue to render a good judgment. And I think the problem is that a lot of people get very reactionary to these things. They post immediately, and then they end up either being wrong or adding to the misinformation. I noticed, I used to do this when I first started social media. I used to react to things that were happening. You're wrong enough times because you acted too quickly that I scaled back on doing that. So I usually give things at least 3 days to a week before I respond to them.
See, and that's super important because honestly, unless you're already super established, but you're going to get the most views if you post immediately because people are looking it up. And so it takes a lot of reservation to kind of withhold on posting a response to a lot of these big issues. And it's not because we don't want to weigh in or we don't want to share things or make people aware of something that's important, but I am 100% of the same mindset.
Today, we're going to be talking about some of the most controversial topics in skincare, from does retinol cause depression? Is benzene in your sunscreen going to kill you? So these are commonly asked questions, and we're going to get into it.
Skincare controversies, here we go.
Here we go.
So the first one is sunscreens. And I love sunscreen for many reasons, but what the heck is with sunscreens? This is like an episode of Desperate Housewives. It cannot stay out of the news.
Okay, this is interesting. So I was on social media first before Dr. Maxfield, right? And I reluctantly grabbed him into the space, and he loves it. We love it now. But I was on TikTok for a long time and on Instagram, and then we started YouTube together. Well, when we first started YouTube, Dr. Maxfield said, let's talk about sunscreens. And I said, no. We're not talking about sunscreens yet. We need to wait till all the cards play out. And he's like, we talking about, we're dermatologists. We need to talk about sunscreen. And I said, no. I've been on TikTok long enough to know that there are way too many controversies in sunscreen for us to talk about this topic yet. And so we actually held back. And he didn't understand why. Now he knows why.
It's 100% true story.
So many different things have come up from, let's talk about the most recent one, benzene in your sunscreen.
Right. And so when this came out, I looked at it as okay, it's just another headline grabber. And then I looked into it more and I was like, okay, this is a very valid study. They really did a good job. And I don't know why there's so many independent labs continuously going over your sunscreen, but they're catching things. And so the benzene in of itself, as everybody knows at this point, it is carcinogenic. It has no beneficial role in your sunscreen, but it's also kind of ubiquitous in the environment from other things.
Right. Ubiquitous. It's everywhere. So in New York City, they did a study on the amount of benzene in the air. There are very high levels of benzene in the air. There's benzene in your water. There's benzene in your food products. There's benzene in your makeups. So small amounts. We don't like benzene. No one's promoting benzene. You're not going to find benzene listed on your skincare. So if you're looking at the back of your skincare product, you're not going to see the word benzene on the back of your skincare product. It's not an ingredient in skincare, it's a contaminant. So somewhere during the manufacturing process, when they're making these sunscreens, when they're making these skincare products, when they're processing food, somehow benzene contaminates these. It has to do with some type of reaction that's occurring at the lab, or maybe these ingredients mixed together, or the way that they process these. Somehow benzene is ending up in some sunscreens.
Yeah, and I think the magnitude of this was something that surprised everybody, and myself included. You look at the list, it's just a ton of brands. And I don't know if they're all using the same manufacturing warehouse or whatever, but it really involved a lot of trusted brands I still use and will use again. But it really did warrant people paying attention to it and making some temporary changes.
How did this all start? A lab called Valisher came out with a study. They tested a bunch of different sunscreens, and then they came out and they said a bunch of these sunscreens had benzene in them. A bunch of these sunscreens didn't have benzene in them. The good news is that most sunscreens didn't have benzene. The other problem with this thing is that they didn't test every sunscreen. They just randomly picked a bunch of them and said, hey, we're going to test these. The most common culprits were actually spray forms of sunscreen. But what does this actually mean, right? Because one, it was just certain batches that they tested. So we don't even know if the sunscreen you were using has benzene in it.
Yeah.
We also don't know if it's at a level that is actually going to be harmful. We find no level of benzene to be acceptable. So I think we'll definitely put the list below here so that you can look at the list of sunscreens that did have benzene in them. Is this something we should be scared of?
So when I'm thinking of like an exposure risk, I'm like, one, what's the risk to my health immediately and long term? And I think immediately, very, very little risk. The idea of this is that over like a lifetime of exposure, it could increase your risk of certain types of cancers. So it needs to be addressed. The immediate risk in my mind is very low, but we've already said it's kind of everywhere.
Right. So you shouldn't go out of your way to find benzene, right? But if it's in there, I wouldn't lose your mind over it. So I think that this is one that went the direction of fear mongering a little bit. So I always go by, my standard of treatment is always what would I say to my family members? And so I did look at the sunscreens, saw if any of my family members or my wife was using these sunscreens. And if they were, I told them to temporarily stop using them. So I think that that's a reasonable response. If you're using sunscreen to prevent skin cancer, it would be reasonable to not have benzene in your sunscreen. Do I think that this is a good excuse not to wear sunscreen? I think that's the message that a lot of people got out of this, was that a lot of videos started going viral on social media that said sunscreen actually causes skin cancer, right, which we've never shown any sunscreen to cause skin cancer. All we found was a contaminant in a few batches of sunscreen.
Yeah, and that's the tough thing, I think. We see the other side of it. We see the skin cancers that, I don't want to say it because I also don't want to fearmonger, but, exceptionally, they can consume huge portions of people's, face. That's mostly what I'm working on now, people's faces. And, that's what we're trying to help people avoid. It does cause significant deformity, significant morbidity, and it does take a large amount of people's lives, skin cancer that is. And people need to be using sunscreen, especially if you're living a lifestyle that's outdoors, like me, or if you are having a job where you're outdoors. This is something that's going to be extremely important for your health down the road.
And yeah, this is why it's so disappointing when things like this happen, because we spend a lot of time trying to build trust with people saying, hey, wear sunscreen. It's going to protect you from aging. It's going to protect you from skin cancer. And then something like this happens and you're like, oh, now these things are at odds with each other. And that's super unfortunate, because I really believe that sunscreen overall, despite all the controversies this year from sunscreen SPF levels not matching what they were supposed to match, from benzene in your sunscreen, from the chemical sunscreens being absorbed into the body, all these different things that have happened, I still think the benefits of sunscreen outweigh the risks of sunscreen.
Actually, conflicts of interest on that part of it is, if we convince everyone to effectively wear sunscreen every single day, it actually significantly would decrease our jobs. We're not doing this because we're trying to draw a business. We're actually doing this to keep people out of our office.
Benefits outweigh the risks for sunscreen. I would continue to use them. I wouldn't lose my mind over some of these controversies. I think that overall sunscreen has an overall net benefit for people. And we see this in people that do wear sunscreen and people that don't wear sunscreen in our clinical practice every day. So tremendous benefits to wearing sunscreen. We highly recommend it. Please don't be scared by some of these fear-mongering stories that come out. Next up, does retinol cause depression?
Okay, I actually want to know, maybe you might know this, Dr. Shaw. I feel like if anyone knows this, he would know it. Where did this start? Do you know, was there a unifying one source?
One video, single video that wrecked the internet. It's fascinating how one guy, he actually stitched a video on TikTok, and he basically said, we'll actually just roll the clip.
Retinol is a depressant. So my psychiatrist and I were going through my medication list, and she was like, oh, how long have you been using retinol? And I said, oh, since I was a teenager, I used to have really bad acne. And she said, well, actually, that can make depression worse. You'll see all the skincare gurus on here telling you that it's so good for anti-aging properties and smoothing out your skin and for acne and stuff, but they don't tell you that. This includes over-the-counter retinols. So FYI, PSA, heard it from a psychiatrist.
Okay, so that's how it started.
What do we think?
It's kind of disappointing, actually, because, I don't know a psychiatrist. I don't want to be overly critical of them. It does happen, I think you see a medication that has some sort of effect systemically, and then you see a similar thing topically, and you assume that it has the same effect. I don't know if that had ever been an association anyone had put together before, that over-the-counter retinols cause depression.
You heard it there first. So, hot takes. I believe that their psychiatrist told them this. I believe that that's due to a misinterpretation of data, and that it's not accurate, but I believe that that's what he was told. And I think it's harmful because there are a lot of people with acne or with depression that are on retinol, and they're thinking, well, this thing caused my depression now, and now I'm going to stop it, and it's going to make their skin worse, and they're going to get more depressed.
Absolutely. It's just a self-perpetuating cycle that is probably actually going on right now as we're making this video for some people. I'm very comfortable saying, I've actually struggled with depression and anxiety myself. So coming from that perspective, I understand when you're in the space, you're like, what can I do to get out of this? This is not the answer. But now we have to break this down scientifically. So how can we backtrack and discuss and prove, at least as best we can, that topical retinols don't cause depression?
All right, so let's start at how probably this all began. So there's a medication called Accutane, no longer called Accutane anymore. It's called isotretinoin, and it is a vitamin A derivative. It is a retinoid, and it is an oral medication, and it is extremely effective at treating acne. That's the most important thing. But there is this black box warning that it can increase the risk of depression.
So the origins of this actually go a ways back, and since that time, we have a ton of data on how people do with systemic retinoids at very high concentrations, systemic high-dose vitamin A. And there's a little bit of controversy within the professional space, even on this. So different journals emphasize different things. Overall, I think another article that was put out in 2017, looking at all of the pooled data and did a pooled analysis, showed that depression actually improves in patients who have acne and take isotretinoin.
If you have really bad acne that makes you not want to hang out with friends and is actually a cause of your depression or makes your depression worse, if you get on Accutane, this often makes your mood better. And I've seen this in clinic.
Oh, yeah. And that's the side of it, too. We see hundreds of patients each week. Thousands of acne patients at this point. And we see so reproducibly, consistently, that people who have their acne cleared up very, very effectively by isotretinoin or Accutane, they are a new person coming out on the other side of it. It is so rewarding.
So is that to say that isotretinoin or Accutane has no side effects? It has known side effects, and we check and monitor for those things very closely. So your dermatologist will check your labs, they'll monitor for side effects, they'll ask you about suicidality and depression at your initial visit, and then they'll check on this every single time that you follow up. And like Dr. Maxwell was saying, the pooled meta-analysis, all the data that we've had from all the different studies that we've combined together have come to the conclusion that it's not necessarily a cause of depression or suicidality in patients. It seems that there is a select group of patients that do have depression when they start this medication, though.
Yeah, I wouldn't go so far as to say it could never cause depression in anybody. Overall, people seem to do better and have better moods coming out through having used this medication. But this is a medication that has a very, very big upside. And if we use it deliberately and with, I think, the respect that the medicine deserves and cautiously and carefully, it's something that absolutely should be used and helpful for people.
And this goes back to sort of our philosophy on things. Is it something we'd recommend to a family friend? Absolutely. If you have bad acne and you're suffering from it, or you have other conditions that require the use of isotretinoin, for the appropriate patient, is a tremendous medication, has known side effects. The risk of depression seems to be up in the air. The psychiatry literature and the dermatology literature differ on this, but it seems that when you put all the data together, that the risk is relatively low, and it's just a discussion you need to have personally with your dermatologist. Now, the question in this video is whether or not topical retinol is going to cause depression, and I think that the answer to that is no.
Yeah, I think you can probably say that with a lot of confidence. Look, in general, things you put on topically, obviously you don't absorb nearly as much, but can we quantify that? And the answer is yes, we can. Actually, so here's the best part. There have already been studies predating any of this that were looking at the absorption of topical retinoids, retinols, and it's very, very low. Like at most, let's say up to 2% of this already super small, tiny amount you're putting on your skin is absorbed. And that was done at 1 day, 1 month, and 1 year. So no matter how long you've been using it within that period of time, you can be sure that your absorption of this is small.
So incredibly low absorption rate. It's going to have a lot of those benefits right at the skin surface without necessarily the side effects that you would get with an oral isotretinoin or Accutane. So your topical Retin-A, your tretinoin, your retinol, for me, from my perspective, I would not be worried about those causing depression at all. 0% in my mind risk of this happening. And so I would say that do not worry about these. If anything, your skin will get better and your mood will overall improve.
So we will have probably a whole video just dedicated to Accutane. It's such a nuanced topic. If nothing else, though, it's effective.
Extremely effective, and we will go over all the risks and the benefits of the medication. But this is a discussion you'll have with your dermatologist whether or not you think the risks outweigh the benefits,
right,
or vice versa. Nuanced discussion coming soon. The next topic, and this was a huge hot topic last year, but fragrance in your skincare products. What do we think about those?
Yeah, so what do we think about those? What does fragrance do for your skincare routine? And you tolerate it, really?
The way that I look at it is this. So yesterday I tried the Nivea cream and it has fragrance in it. It's a moisturizer. Now, do I get on social media and I tell people go buy the Nivea cream? I usually tell them don't buy the Nivea cream because there are other options that don't have fragrance in them that I think perform just as well as moisturizers. And so I go the path of like the do no harm, and it depends on whether you're an optimist or a pessimist. The way that I look at it is, we have all these people that watch our videos on YouTube, on TikTok, and that if you have 1 million people watch a video and 4% are allergic to an ingredient in that video, I recommend products that have fragrance in them because I like them, or I think that there's no alternative actually to that particular thing. But the point is that if 40,000 people have an allergic reaction, that's a pretty bad outcome as far as I'm concerned. But then if you look at it on the flip side, 96% of people had a good outcome. And so that's where I say, like, okay, if you're recommending things to a large audience, I tend to lean on the more conservative side because I want the most benefit with the lowest risk.
I completely understand that. And I think actually, in general, you'll find that myself and other dermatologists also will prioritize talking about ingredients that don't have fragrance in it for that very reason. We're all very hyper aware of sensitive skin because we spend a lot of time treating sensitive skin. And so given the option of, two similar products, I would default and pick, yes, the one without fragrance is probably going to be the better option for everybody. And if you have sensitive skin, the one without fragrance is absolutely 100% the better option for you. Now, if a product has fragrance in it and I overall like the product, I think even you just said you would still say, hey, it's a good product. Similarly, I would too. I would say this is a good product. I would try to mention it has fragrance in it, and then you can take that with a grain of salt and be careful with it.
A lot of times there's no substitute, right? So Nizoral shampoo is a shampoo that has antifungal properties. There is nothing else over the counter that has ketoconazole in it. It's the only product. It has fragrance in it. So if I think it's extremely effective, for me, I think the benefits outweigh the risk of that product. There's literally no alternative. When it comes to things like moisturizers, retinols, things like that, for me, that's a no-brainer. You have one that's fragrance-free, you have one that has fragrance in it. 100% of the time, I'm choosing the one that's fragrance-free if it's gonna have the same benefits.
Yeah, exactly. Because so the fragrance, I mean, you were kind of alluding to this without just saying it outright, is fragrance does nothing for your skin. It really does nothing to help your skin heal, does nothing to help your skin look better, dewy, or whatever. It's just there to help you kind of enjoy the experience. And honestly, I like fragrance. I like stopping and smelling flowers. I don't wear cologne, but I have historically, I had like one bottle of, I think, Abercrombie Fierce, and it probably lasted me 10 years before I lost it. It is a nice experience. And for someone who wants that as a part of their life, be aware it can cause allergies.
Fragrance certainly adds to the experience of skincare. And so I have these arguments with other dermatologists. They say, oh, well, I like using fragrance in my skincare products because I like the way that they smell. completely think that that's reasonable to do that. And I encourage you to do that if you're using a fragrance product. I think it's totally fine to do that as long as you're not allergic to it. But it is true that fragrance is created through having sort of volatile chemicals that create a fragrant experience. So some type of reaction has to occur for it to produce a scent. And some people argue that that reaction will actually sensitize the skin. And so even if it's not causing allergy in you, it could also cause irritation in you at very low levels. But I think that if skincare is part of the experience, I think it's worth it if you think the benefits outweigh the risk. It's not going to make your skincare products more effective, but it may make your routine more enjoyable, which may make you stick with your routine.
So we have that fragrance adds nothing for the skin. The downside is that it can cause irritation, allergy, sensitize you, or allow you to be sensitized to other ingredients. So if you are one of the people who decides you want fragrance in your skincare, what are the best ways that you can use it with, like, minimizing, I guess, your risk of allergies and irritation?
Good question. So one, using it in a cleanser, having a cleanser with fragrance in it is not going to sit on the skin for as long. And so I think cleansers with fragrance in them have lower risk than leave-on products. The other thing is using maybe a fragrance-free moisturizer with maybe your active has fragrance in it. But when you start to compound multiple forms of fragrance on the skin and you got 6 skincare products that all have fragrance in them and they're all different fragrances, right? So when you see the word fragrance on the back of your skincare, that's a proprietary ingredient. And so a lot of skincare brands will not disclose what that fragrant ingredient is. Now, I think the EU has some regulations that make you disclose if it's certain ingredients that commonly cause allergy. So there's a list of ingredients that you have to disclose even if it's in your fragrance mix. But I believe in the United States, there's no regulation that says that you need to put what the actual fragrant components of this thing are in them. And so now you take fragrance, they all have different fragrances in them. Now you have 46 chemicals on your skin that all could potentially cause allergy. Because they are volatile components. And so that's where I think I would minimize it to maybe one product that has fragrance in it.
Yeah, completely agree. So rinse off products, minimize the different types of fragrances you're using. And so in my mind, it's like use fragrance deliberately. Like that's a word. If I had a tattoo, which I don't, I would have that tattooed on me because, like, look, you're deliberately using this because it smells good. So like pick the smell you like the best and pick one, right? You don't need to smell like 30 different fragrances. And then I guess along with the idea of all this like proprietary blend and mixing, I think it is reasonable for things that are naturally scented, which absolutely can be allergenic, absolutely can, to when they're listed as like a sole solitary ingredient on the ingredient label, like citrus, I think it's reasonable to use that more favorably than than a product that has just like fragrance mix listed.
Right. And that's completely true. So when you say fragrance mix, and it doesn't disclose any of the ingredients, as a matter of fact, when it comes to fragrance mix, there are a few brands that are actually trying to push forward and disclosing everything that's in that fragrance mix. And so, Unilever is doing it. I think Johnson & Johnson is doing it now, where they actually will tell you every ingredient that's in that fragrance mix as long as it's over a certain level. But if you have a fragrance-free product and then it has citrus in it, at least you could say, I'm not allergic to citrus and I will use this product and it's not causing me a problem. Versus fragrance where you don't really know what's in it. If you have lavender oil or citrus in your products, at least you know what the fragrant component is. And I think that those I prefer personally.
Okay, yeah. And I guess one thing too, like the idea of fragrance-free versus unscented, know that that's completely different. Like fragrance-free, it should mean that there actually are no fragrances. And then unscented means whatever fragrance that might be in there is not being used as a fragrance. It's being used as like a preservative or some other function. But you can still have a fragrance in something that's unscented.
Now the question is, in citrus components or in bergamot, is there this risk that you have furocoumarins in them, which can cause something called phytophotodermatitis, which is basically the sun hits the skincare product and causes this chemical reaction that leads to a skin rash.
So this is another like really unique condition. I think dermatologists were hyper aware of this as well, just because it's within our wheelhouse. It's not commonplace to have this, but this is why we like to caveat things in. Like citrus, can be an allergen, rarely can cause phytophotodermatitis as well. We want to be aware of it. We want to help people be aware of it.
I don't think I've ever seen this happen to a skincare product, to be honest. I've seen it happen with people that use limes in their drinks when they're making margaritas. I've seen people get this from lemons. I've seen these people get this from oranges, but I've never seen anybody actually get this from a skincare product. And the reason why this is because I've actually talked to chemists at skincare brands. They actually remove the furocoumarins from these ingredients. And so if there is furocoumarins in your more bergamot oil in your skincare products or in your citrus components of your skincare products, it's usually very, 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 very low to the point where it's not going to cause an issue in a lot of people. And so I think the risk is low. I think it's worth mentioning, but I think for a lot of people, the risk is really low. And you're going to notice that derms, regardless of fragrance, regardless of anything else, we always err on the side of caution because one, we know the downside of things that happen, because a lot of times patients, they come into our clinics when the worst thing has happened. So when we say like, don't do microneedling at home, or we say, you know, avoid fragrance and skincare products, it's because we see allergy or we see irritation or we see damage to the skin barrier because they come to the office when everything goes wrong. Now, there's a bunch of people that aren't coming to the office because nothing has gone wrong. And so we tend to get the sample size of people that have really bad outcomes. The risks of some of these things are lower than perceived, but at the end of the day, for me, I really just try to err on the side of caution. All right, thank you all so much for tuning in. Controversies in skincare. So this is like episode 1 of this. I'm sure we're gonna do these like monthly at this point because something always comes up. We're gonna wait. We're never gonna be like the first ones. So just be patient with us. We'll, you know, if you comment enough about a certain topic, we will put together a comprehensive response to these particular topics and make sure that we have enough data to answer. And if we don't know, we can always say, we're not sure this may change, because I think that's such an important thing. And we talked about this in our How to Be a Dermatologist video about how we've been humbled so many different times that we need to be cautious about what we recommend, but we're going to be wrong sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're going to be wrong, but always know that we've put in a lot of effort on the back end, like not only just making the video, but I mean, just like a decade worth of just brutally hard work to try to make sure we're putting out information that's helpful.
So thank you all so much for tuning in. Please like, comment, and subscribe.
Yeah, we greatly appreciate you.
See you next time.
See you next time.